Hello and welcome back to another summer edition of Local Image. We're outside the historic Fillebrown House here in White Bear Lake, which recently reopened for tours and more. And here to tell us why it was closed and much more about the house is Sarah Marco Hansen. She's the director of the White Bear Area Historical Society. Sarah, what a beautiful day to be here on the grounds of the historic Fillebrown House.
It's really perfect, and these are the kind of days that brought people out to the community and made White Bear the first resort community in Minnesota.
And that's why this home was built. I mean, the lake is right across the street from where we are. Tell us a little bit more about the history of this home.
Charles and Emily Noyes were the ones who first built the house in 1879, and it was exactly 4 days like this. Like I said, it was built as a summer cottage to escape. They were residents of St. Paul. They wanted to escape the heat and the busyness of the city. They had a young family. It was very, very typical for St. Paul residents to come out here to the lake and either tent camp or stay in the resorts or build their own cottages, depending on what sort of means they had. And the original portion of the cottage, which is what you're seeing in the front here, was built, like I said, in 1879. The Noyes family only spent 2 summers in this house, and then Manitou Island became available. So they moved out there and built a cottage and sold it to another family. And it stayed as a summer cottage for a number of years with them. And then the Fillebrowns got involved, which you'll hear about a lot more as we go.
So Sarah, was this considered kind of a typical cottage of the time?
Some aspects of it were typical, but the architectural style is really unique, and that's why it's on the National Register of Historic Places. The style is actually called the stick style of architecture, and it brings in sort of some of the rustic elements, so the extra boards and framing that you see on the outside and the timbering are typical of that style, and the idea, and even the colors, the red and the green, are sort of a commitment to nature and that connection to nature sort of feel. It was a fairly typical style in the East, but not in the Midwest.
When did the Historical Society actually take ownership of this building, this structure?
In the 1970s. So the Fillebrowns were here for about 70 years, and Helen and Arthur were the children of Jonas and Harriet. And basically they never married, they never had kids of their own, and they had such a passion for this house and maintaining it with that feel of the summer cottage. So as they aged, they wanted to make sure that would be able to continue. So in the early 70s, an arrangement was actually brokered between the Historical Society and the Fillebrowns to basically transfer the property, but they could continue to live here and use it as long as they needed to. But the Historical Society would actually do a lot of the maintenance.
And speaking of the structure, I mean, that's the reason why this was closed for a while. Tell us why that was, and I have an idea that maybe it has something to do with the fact that this is a very old house.
Basically, it's really not a pretty story, if you will. It's one of those not so fun home repairs you have to deal with.
Scenes,
exactly. So essentially, what we had to do was stabilize the structural system of the house, which is a mouthful in itself. When the house was built, it was built on the ground, built on grade and on wood timbers. And so, as you can imagine, the wood tends to rot, and when a house is 135, 136 years old, it's aged a little bit.
Right.
In 1991, the Historical Society needed more storage space and just more space in general for storm windows and all sorts of things. So the house was lifted up. A full modern basement was put in with cement and block and the whole thing, and has been an absolutely wonderful addition. But since that time, some of the pieces that were relied upon from a structural standpoint from the original portion of the house have failed. And no one could necessarily foresee that, but it's just kind of what's happened over the years, over the last 25 years. And so those pieces needed some extra backup, if you will. And so a wonderful group of engineers and architects and the Historical Society have come together and figured out a good plan to make that happen, and have been able to actually put in re-supportive systems underneath, and now the house is safe and back open. And
there's so many stories to be told.
There are.
From inside this home, and we're going to hear more about that. So when we come back, we'll take you inside the home to tour some of the rooms and hear about what life was like back in the early 1900s. But first, we're going to go from this big old house to some tiny new ones as we meet someone who's building tiny homes in this Local Image segment.
2007, I was working for a large construction company, and they were doing some downsizing, so I was one of the ones that were let go. And so that left me out there, what do I do? And talking to headhunters and stuff, they said, you're gonna have to do something to create your own work. I've been a carpenter since I was in my 20s, and so I knew a lot of the aspects of in and out of construction. I did a lot of remodeling on my own, and so I knew the plumbing and electrical and how to do that. Some people might consider jack of all trades, master of none type of philosophy. And so I decided, what can I do with all this information that I know? And so that's how I got into tiny houses. I started building one, and one led into the other. I had designed what's called the Ravenlore tiny house, was Carpenter Gothic. And a year ago, a customer asked me, she emailed me, I want to build that house. I want to do it in these colors. What can I do? She said, I want purple, sea green, king cyan blue, and pink. I liked the color scheme because it was really popping, but I also knew it was going to be really different. Because a lot of tiny houses are the standard rustic, brownish, earth tones tiny houses that fit into that you find in the woods, in the cabins and stuff like that. Tiny's, it's like remodeling and versus new construction. It takes a different mindset to do a tiny house than either one of those two. Remodeling is close to it. And they're fun to do. They're fun to do. Each one's different. If I see something that needs enhancement, or if I see a space that's wasted, like the spaces below deck, the smuggler stories that I call them. Okay, these will be hatches. They're right here. They have hinges on this side right here, and a finger pull so that you can pick up and open the hatch up. People will be able to have trays to slide back and forth. I put drawers underneath toe kicks so I could pull in drawers in and out of there. And at the head of the stairs here, there was a 4-inch void. Well, that's perfect for a spice rack. And a floor-to-ceiling spice rack, you slide in, slide out. So for some taller goods down here, some canned goods there, and some spices up in there. And so that's what we're always looking at. We're always looking at options. What can we do different? How can we change it? Always thinking outside the box. This trailer came due, and I needed a place to paint it. And I knew Pete, and I asked, is there a possibility I can use part of the bay to paint the trailer? Because it's January, and it was 20 below about that time. There's no way you're painting in January 20 below outside. And so he said, yeah, sure, let me clean out the spot, let me get you in here. So I came in here, I liked it. Till you actually walk into a tiny house, you have no clue on what can be done or how it impacts you. What it does, it gives you the freedom so that you're not investing $300,000, $500,000 in a house. Now you're only investing maybe $60,000 to $80,000 in a tiny house. And so just the savings on interest alone, you've paid for your tiny house. Now you have chances to chase your passion that you want to do. Meeting new people, getting to know new people, that's the fun part. I love building tiny houses. I love being on the forefront of the contact with the people, getting to know them and what they want, and trying to meet their expectations. When it comes to tiny houses, it's my passion, and I have fun doing it.
That is their official wedding portrait. They were fortunate enough to have one, which not everyone did. And Jonas, or Walter, as he was commonly known, is Mr. Fillebrown, of course. And then Harriet was Mrs. Fillebrown.
A handsome couple.
They were. They really were. And they really cherished that portrait and a number of other special ones throughout the years.
And this home is full of some of the original items that were in the home when they were living here and before then.
Absolutely.
And we're obviously inside the home now. And what would this area be right outside the front door here, inside the front door?
In a typical Victorian architectural plan, this would be the entry parlor, if you will, or the front parlor, usually a greeting space. And then as you've sort of moved into the room, it's sort of two sections now, and would have been at that point as well, would have been more of a rear parlor. And so because we're at the lake and at the cottage, it's a little less formal, but still formal compared to some other parts of the house.
Sure. And what are some of the other parts of the house, and a kind of a list of what rooms are in this house? How many?
There are a number of rooms. It really doesn't always seem like that from the outside, but there are 3 bedrooms upstairs, as well as a room that's used as a bedroom down here, may or may not have always been. The middle room, which is what we call one of the big spaces, which was more of a dining room, kitchen combination space. And then what is today used as the kitchen, or has more recently been used as the kitchen, and then an upstairs space called the studio, which is sort of a treasure trove.
And a lot of staircases, like this beautiful one behind me, lots of stairs.
That's one of the big architectural pieces of the house, the front staircase that wraps around the entire entry area. And again, it's more formal than you might find in some cottages. It's made of Georgia pine and has some wonderful carving pieces to it and intricacy.
And I know towards the back there's a small staircase.
There is.
What was that for?
Essentially, that back space, which makes the kitchen and the studio upstairs, was actually a separate building at one time. It was a guest house and a summer kitchen, depending on kind of the time period. And so that was the staircase in that space to be able to get up to the second floor. When it was attached to the house in the 1920s, it was renovated a little bit and again allows for another staircase and space.
Just couldn't have enough staircases.
That's right.
Well, talk a little bit about what life was like for the folks that lived in this home. What would a typical day or weekend be for the families?
Sure.
I mean, what would they be doing?
The life, of course, was different in a lot of ways, but being out at the lake was somewhat the same. They wanted to enjoy the water, the boats, the fishing was a big deal, and certainly from journals and things that we have, they talk a lot about being out on the lake and the sailboats or rowboats and just enjoying what that has to offer.
Today, it doesn't seem like coming to White Bear Lake is really, going far out of the way, but what would it have taken a person who lived in St. Paul to get here?
By the time this cottage was in place, it was a little bit easier, fortunately, and that was really the big building boom of the 1870s, 1880s out in this area. The railroad came through in 1868, connecting St. Paul to White Bear, and that reduced a 3-hour bumpy, bouncy, dirty wagon ride to about a 20-minute train ride, and that opened up all sorts of opportunities. A lot of folks still, if they were coming for the full season, the full summer season, they would still bring out their wagons or whatever loaded with furniture or different things that they might want to bring with them. But if they had to go back and forth, 'cause a lot of the men would come out for the summer, but they would basically stay for the weekends and then go back during the week and stay in the city and leave the families out here.
Well, we're going to hear a lot more about the history as we tour some of the rooms when we come back, but right now I'd like folks to take a look at some other historical segments that were produced a while back for Local Image, featuring some things that I know you know a lot about, but why don't we go ahead and take a look.
October 6, 1868, regular service begins on the Lake Superior and Mississippi Railroad between St. Paul and White Bear Lake. Railroad President William L. Banning sees to it that a depot is built as well. In the mid-1870s, James J. Hill buys the line and names it the St. Paul and Duluth. White Bear Lake is a bustling stop. By 1887, 36 passenger trains run through each day. According to an 1890 edition of the Lake Breeze, even a theater train was added, leaving St. Paul at 11:40 p.m. weeknights, 1 a.m. on Saturdays. 1893 saw a 200-foot roof built to cover the platform. It remained until 1935. In that year, a new depot was built, the old one to make room for Highway 61. White Bear Lake remained a scheduled stop in the 40s and 50s, but a curt notice on November 21, 1966, spelled the end of passenger service. It stopped at 12:01 a.m. on January 5, 1967.
Oh, fun.
So this is the kitchen with all of its tools and pieces that some may look familiar and some may not. A lot of time would have been spent in this area of the house, just like we think of our homes today,
Right.
or often happens in our homes today.
And I noticed right away that there are actually 2 stoves in here. Are they original, and why 2?
Good question. The smaller one is actually a laundry stove, and so of course doing laundry isn't back then wasn't as simple as it is today, if you will, and often the water would need to be boiled to get certain stains out or to process certain issues with the laundry, and so the stove was used for that. It was also used to heat up the irons, because if you've ever seen those irons that are often used for door stops and things nowadays, they usually, a house would have several of those, and they'd keep them on the stove, and then you'd pick one up, use it to iron whatever you're ironing, and they ironed everything back then. So you'd use it to iron whatever you're ironing and then have to put it back. Well, of course, it would cool. It wasn't electric, and you'd pick up another one that was already heated.
Oh my goodness.
So
the kitchen is filled with lots of fun tools and things that, you know, take you right back to that era. And there's some here, this one in particular. What is this?
this little box actually tells us right on it what it is, which is kind of fun, which is nice. But it's a barbecue marshmallow toaster is the brand and label on it. We're not entirely sure how it worked, but it essentially, you put a marshmallow, like for s'mores, right in it, and held it over the fire is what we understand, and then somehow these little guys would allow you to pop the marshmallow out and drop it out onto your graham crackers or whatever.
S'mores.
Oh, they did, and they enjoyed the marshmallows. To me, a stick seems a little bit easier,
Yeah, this was high tech.
Exactly.
This was high tech.
Exactly.
Well, and earlier we saw a beautiful piano, and you mentioned music was a big part of the family. Were the whole family music players? Or?
Walter, the dad, was very musical and creative, more of an actor probably in a lot of ways, but he liked to incorporate music into his little performances. He liked to do little sketches and things. But Helen, the daughter, is the star, really. She was classically trained. She was a concert pianist, and then sort of lost the interest in performing on stage. Kind of had stage fright or anxiety, and didn't like the idea of having to actually do that. But she trained in Europe for several years.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
she actually was sent to Europe to train and study. And so there are 2 pianos in the house now, and the big one is the Steinway Grand, which is one of her prized, or probably her most prized possession, and one of our prized possessions in the house. And Helen taught piano lessons from the house. She had students come and would use the upright piano that's also in the home for the lessons. But when they got to do their recitals, they could play on the Steinway,
Very
which was
cool.
a big treat.
Well, speaking of music, while we continue our tour of the house, we would like to share a special story about a man in Lake Elmo who loves and plays the concertina, and he builds them in his own home.
Nice.
So that's pretty cool. Let's take a look. Jeffrey Wilson brings us this local image story.
I'd say it's similar to a piano accordion, only much better. This thing, you sit on your lap, you can't see your hands. It's the 6 inches between your ears and your heart that makes it work. It's like comparing a violin to a guitar. They're both string instruments, but they're totally different. The only thing that a concertina and a piano accordion have are the reeds and the bellows. And the bellows operate the wind in order to make the reeds respond. A piano accordion, it's the same sound whether you push or pull the bellows. Same sound. On a concertina, each button has 2 tones like a harmonica. Notice there are numbers above the notes, and that's how we play. We play by number, so there's somewhat more difficulty in playing the concertina versus the piano accordion, but they definitely have a very distinct sound. I was about probably 10 years old, and I remember a next door neighbor grinding away in the upstairs bedroom. It was 100 above, and it just grind and grind and grind, you know. I was too young to appreciate the hours that he put in at that time. But after I went over to his house and listened to him play, I says, now I can see that the reward he got out of putting all that hours of practice in. And then when I got involved in the instrument, wanting to learn how to play. And so I contacted, his name was Donald Joswick, and I talked to Don. I says, would you be interested in giving me lessons? And he says, yeah, I'll give you lessons. A friend of mine's brother got married, and he says, would you mind getting a couple of guys and playing? And it was over on Dale and Thomas underneath a bakery, and that was where I played my first gig that I in the world is you no longer are an amateur. If you got paid, you're now a professional. So I built my first concertina. I finished it in 1989. Well, I got started because I was a tool maker. I was a plastic and die casting bowl maker. And there was a fella in Minneapolis that he was doing some building. And he was a good repairman and just very knowledgeable. So I got to know him, and I'd go over there and visit. And then, you know, someplace along the line, I said, well, I'd probably like to make a few. So we started importing the reeds from Italy. It's strictly a hobby. This is not a business. This is something that I enjoy doing. We use basswood because it's light and it's strong. We try to make the instrument as light as possible because it just makes it easier to play. You know, you start adding up the cabinets, the covering, the engraving, the tuning, the bellows. That's where it all adds up, and that pretty soon you've got some real dollars involved in the basic parts of the instrument. Around 10,000, yeah. I do the tuning using a Strobo tuner, and what I do is I have a tuning table here, and it plays the reed, and this tells me whether it's sharp or flat. There are 374 reeds in each instrument, and each one has to be put on pitch. So that takes the tuning is probably a week. It's a good 40 hours alone just in the tuning. I'll tell you, seeing the finished product is really very, very rewarding. I've got 40 concertinas that were built, and they are in 9 different states. You know, there's a piece of me in each and every instrument, and I'm no different than Jerry Minar or Josh Selner over in Sleepy Eye. When we put a lot of time into these things, and we want to make them as nice as they can. That's good music can be played on that instrument. It isn't just polka waltz. The younger generation are missing it. First of all, they don't hold their date's hand. They won't put their arms around them. It's a totally different way of dancing, you know, and it was really very enjoyable. The old time music is fading away. We certainly aren't going to change the next generation. They've got to find it. If they want it, it's there. Simple as that. They've got to find it.
Here's more of those stairs we talked about. Lots and lots of stairs in this house.
No shortage.
And now we're upstairs, obviously, and this is where, 3 bedrooms are?
3 bedrooms, and then the studio area that we just came through was sometimes used as a bedroom when they had a lot of boarders in the house.
Okay, so now this is a typical bedroom. It's not large. Were they much bigger than this?
Some of them were bigger. This isn't certainly the biggest bedroom in the house, and it's toward the back of the house, so it's probably the least exciting as far as architecturally or windows and views and that sort of thing. But from the stories, it's one of the more fun rooms in the house.
Now, who might have stayed in a room like this?
Well, Hattie Long was the resident, if you will, for more than 3 decades. So she was a long-term boarder with the Fillebrowns, and frankly, probably a really good friend of Helen's. She was a teacher in town, born and raised in White Bear, went to school here, went off to teacher's college, and then came back and taught up north for a few years, and then came back and taught right here in White Bear.
Well, the room has a lot of artifacts basically of her life in it, which is really neat, like the photo over there, picture of the schoolhouse. Which one was that?
That was Washington School. So that was actually where Hattie attended classes, and then later, in her later years, came back and taught there for many years.
Very cool. And I noticed there is a bathroom up here. Now, would they have had working plumbing back in those days? I don't think so.
They would have by the 1920s when they decided to live here year-round. Yeah,
Yes.
not necessarily in the early years.
Yeah.
That was a pretty big deal in the bigger homes, just minimally at that point. But
Well, Sarah, while we make our way back downstairs, why don't we have folks at home watch another couple of segments of local history from this area? How's that sound to you?
sounds fantastic.
Okay, take a look and let's go head
All
out.
right.
August 20th, 1937, the White Bear Press announces that the cornerstone will be laid for the new post office on August 27th. More on that later. The original White Bear Lake Post Office was located in James C. Murray's house in 1858. It moved several times over the years before becoming a fixture in the Getty Building in 1905. It remained there until 1938. Excavation for White Bear Lake's first permanent post office began on July 29, 1937. Work continued through August, but laying of the cornerstone was actually delayed due to rain until September 1st. Postmaster Fred Campbell was anxious to move in, and although the work wasn't done, he was in by early 1938. In 1939, artist Nellie G. Best received funds from the TRAP program to paint a mural inside the post office. By 1940, the building was complete. Cost about $42,000.
That brings us back to where we started.
Oh my gosh, this was a great tour. This house is so incredible, and there's so much we didn't even get to talk about today.
So true.
But the good news is folks can come for tours and other events. Why don't you tell them how they can find out more about that?
Absolutely. Information is always available on our website, whitebearhistory.org. This month we have tours on the 8th and 22nd, and reservations are recommended. So the phone number's there, and you can check it all out and get set up.
Well, I'm sorry we're out of time because I would love to spend more with you here today. But I do thank you for the tour. It's always
Absolutely.
a pleasure to,
We'll have to have you
work with
back.
you. Oh, absolutely. And I do thank you for watching this month's show. Please join me again for an all-new show in September. And until then, as always, I do thank you for watching Local Image.